Hi guys, how are you all doing? Welcome to another episode of Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Marenfeld. I'm Brandon Marenfeld. Thank you guys for joining me today. This is episode 128 of Hockey on the Spot. I apologize for not getting this out to you earlier today. I had a really busy day. It is now 8:54 p.m., almost 9 o'clock. Like I said, I was really busy today, so I'm just getting this video out to you guys now. Might not be uploaded till tomorrow, but we'll see. It will be on YouTube, definitely, but I'll get it up as soon as I can. But anyway, to more important matters. Well, the Stanley Cup Finals, as well as the 2013-2014 NHL season, have officially come to a close. The Los Angeles Kings have won the Stanley Cup. They have defeated the New York Rangers. They defeated them in 5 games, just as I said they would. Congratulations to the Los Angeles Kings on their second Stanley Cup in 3 years. Also the second team that captained by Dustin Brown. He is the first American to captain his team to 2 cups. The first American captain to win 2 cups. Definitely a moment that will go down in history, for sure. Just the Los Angeles Kings, what a resilient team they were throughout this entire playoff run. And there's just they were just pretty much unbeatable. They weren't as unbeatable as they were in 2012. That was just something beyond belief. They just in this year they just came up big when they had to, especially in the first 3 rounds when they just got past every team in 7 games, including a 3-0 comeback in the first round series with the San Jose Sharks, and a 3-2 comeback in their second round series over the Anaheim Ducks. They did blow a 3-1 series lead to the Chicago Blackhawks in the Western Conference Finals, but Alec Martinez would score a dramatic overtime winner in Game 7 to get his team to the finals. Against the New York Rangers, however, they would not need to go to 7 games. It would only take 5, and the series broke down as such. Games 1 and 2 would be in Los Angeles. The Kings would have home ice advantage in the series because they had more points. Even though the Rangers were the higher seed, they were the 5th seed in the East, the Kings were the 6th seed in the West. Even though the Rangers were the higher seed, the Kings had more points. They believed they had exactly 100 points, and the Rangers had 96. So, so that is why the Kings had the home ice advantage. So Game 1 in LA, the Rangers take a 2-0 lead in that game, including a short-handed goal. But the Kings come back and to win the game in overtime. Justin Williams, Mr. Game 7 himself, goes on to score the overtime winner. Kings take Game 1. Game number 2 is probably the most interesting game of the series. A game in which the Rangers held a 2-goal lead at 3 different points in the game. They held a 2-0 lead, a 3-1 lead, and a 4-2 lead, plus a 2-1 and 3-2 leads as well. But ultimately, they had a 4-2 lead going into the third. But then, not only did they play poorly in the third period, a very questionable call for the goal that would make it 4-3 really ruined the Rangers for the rest of the game. It hurt them for the rest of the game. A call in which Dwight King ran into Henrik Lundqvist, a call that was not made, a clear goaltender interference was not called. That made it a 4-3 game, and then Marian Gaborik would tie up the game. Aim at 4. The game would take double overtime, but in double overtime, the captain, Dustin Brown, would score off a deflection and to give the Kings a 2-0 series lead. That was the backbreaker for the Rangers, not just in that game, but for the remainder of the series. And it was a Stanley Cup series in which bad calls were made all over the ice, and most of them going against the Rangers. Game 3, the series shifts to Madison Square Garden. The only game of this series that was sort of a blowout. A real poor performance by the goaltender, Henrik Lundqvist, killed the Rangers. They would outshoot the Kings 32-15, in which shot-wise and overall play-wise, it was the Rangers' best game of the series, but Henrik Lundqvist was very bad in that game, and therefore the Kings would win by a final score of 3-0. A game that was the fault of the goaltender, Henrik Lundqvist. Game 4, now the Kings hold a 3-0 series lead. Game 4, Rangers try to stay alive. Rangers now would not only stay alive, they would win game, but they would set an NHL record. Game 4, they would win by would be a steal of a game. The Rangers were totally dominated in Game 4, being outshot 41-19. But Henrik Lundqvist had a strong comeback performance from Game 3 and totally stole one for the Rangers, just as I said would happen. I said that the Kings would win the series in 5, and that the one game that they would win, Henrik Lundqvist would steal. The Rangers would set an NHL record. The Rangers would set an NHL record with their Game 4 win. Most home games won when facing elimination. The record was originally 8. The record is now 9. This New York Ranger team now set that record. A great honor for a team that lost a series by so much. That win would send a Game 5 back to Los Angeles. The Kings, in front of the home crowd, the chance to win it. The Kings would get the first goal of the game before the Rangers would score both a power play goal and a short-handed goal to take a 2-1 lead. Then, early in the third period, a power play goal by the former Ranger Marian Gaborik would tie the game. Marian Gaborik finished the playoffs as the leader in goals with 14. This game would take double overtime, and then late in double overtime, a 3-on-2 developed by the Kings. A shot saved by Lundqvist. He lets up a rebound, and Alec Martinez's 5th of the playoffs from Tyler Toffoli's 7th assist of the playoffs, and Kyle Clifford's 6th assist of the playoffs at 14:43 into double overtime would be the goal that would win the Stanley Cup. So Alec Martinez not only scored the overtime winner in Game 7 against the Chicago Blackhawks, but he would also score the Stanley Cup winning goal in Game 5 against the New York Rangers. Both overtime winners. And for Martinez, this is just a player who, never really was known for doing too much productive-wise, but this was a big goal and a moment he'll remember forever. The Conn Smythe Trophy would coincidentally enough go to the guy who finished as the leading scorer of the Stanley Cup Finals, Los Angeles Kings forward, number 14, Justin Williams. Mr. Game 7 himself, who had a goal in Game 5, actually, his 9th of the playoffs, would become the Conn Smythe Trophy winner before Dustin Brown, for the second time in 3 years, would be handed the Stanley Cup by NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman. So congratulations to the Los Angeles Kings on what a very memorable moment, their second cup in 3 Stanley Cup Finals appearances, franchise-wise. And it's just one of those things that shows that hockey in California is growing, and it's growing fast. Now the Kings have the most Stanley Cups of any California team, originally held by the Anaheim Ducks, who for many years had the only cup by a California team before the Kings won in 2012 and then again this year. And the 2 cups the Kings won, They defeated two Hudson River rivals. 2012, they defeated the New Jersey Devils, and obviously this year they've defeated the New York Rangers. But against the Devils, that took 6 games, while the Devils had home ice advantage, and the Kings were the 8th seed. A Cinderella run that will never be forgotten. Now, on to further business. Why the Kings won and why the Rangers lost. Pretty simple analysis, actually. First, let's talk about why the Kings won the Stanley Cup. The Kings won the Stanley Cup because primarily of their resilience. This was a team that just did not give up when the cards were not in their favor. They were down in 3 of the games. 3 of the games that they were down, they came back to tie, and all 3 games they won in overtime. The resilience of the team just was so much, not just in this series, but in the other 3 series as well, against the San Jose Sharks, Anaheim Ducks, and Chicago Blackhawks. That is why they won. They went to 3 Game 7s on the road and won them all. That's an NHL record. You just give so much credit to the Kings and their resilience. They were like cockroaches. They just never went away. Another reason why, the strong play in net by Jonathan Quick. Quick was with the exception of Game 2, Jonathan Quick played 10 times better than Henrik Lundqvist in the series overall. Quick came up with huge saves when needed, and other than Game 2, he did not allow more than 2 goals in each of the games. Game 2, he would allow 4. So, I guess in a sense you could say 2 of them can maybe be donated to Game 3. So effectively speaking, in 5 games he only gave up 10 goals, which is pretty darn good. Whereas Henrik Lundqvist gave up, at least 3 goals in each game, with the exception of Game 4. Game 2 he gave up 5, and Game 4 he only gave up 1. So in a sense, 2 of those goals from Game 2 could be donated to Game 4. So if you put all that together, Henrik Lundqvist gave up a total of 15 goals in 5 games. So the Kings basically won the series by a final score of 15-10 in 5 games. Which is pretty upsetting if you're the Rangers. The third reason why the Kings won, their depth was very consistent. Every player on the Kings was absolutely consistent throughout the whole series. Even Anze Kopitar, who didn't have a goal in the series, set up plays and had a good number of assists. The depth players came through, and the top scorers came through. Not one player on the Kings played poorly in the whole series. Every player had a role to play, and every player played it perfectly. And it caused the Rangers a lot of trouble. Another reason why, the Kings' strong play in third periods and in overtimes. In third periods, they just absolutely dominated. In fact, they had more shots on goal in 4 of the 5 games. The one game that they did not have more shots was the game they won 3-0. Game 3 at Madison Square Garden. And you look at the Kings, they did not allow the Rangers to get generate many opportunities, and the Kings developed so much pressure. Their time in the opposite zone was much longer than the Rangers' time in the opposite zone, in the offensive zone. The Rangers could not sustain pressure. The Kings blocked every passing lane and every shot. Their defense was strong. They are the one defensive core that is most definitely stronger than the New York Rangers defense core. And for the Kings, it's a defense core that could last for a good while. This team is like the Chicago Blackhawks. This team is the next closest thing to a dynasty. It is all about those two teams in the West now, the Chicago Blackhawks and the Los Angeles Kings. They are the two closest things to dynasties right now. And those two could be seen in the Western Conference Finals playing each other for a very long time. It's going to be very interesting to see. The Kings, though, are a much better, well-rounded team than the Chicago Blackhawks. The Kings had everything they could ask for, whereas the Hawks did have some flaws. They still don't have a second-line center, something they'll be looking for in the offseason. The Kings have everything they need. There's not going to be much needed to be done in the offseason unless, of course, Marian Gaborik does decide to depart, in which they would need to sign a top-scoring winger. Marian Gaborik, however, they are going to be looking into keeping Marian Gaborik and signing him for a good few years. They like the way he played in Los Angeles, especially in the playoffs, and he fit Daryl Sutter's style very well. And the final reason as to why the Kings won the series and why they won the cup. I mentioned the goaltending of Jonathan Quick. Was how well they played even strength. They did play very well on the power play and on the penalty kill as well, but 5-on-5, they were just a force to be reckoned with. They prevented the Rangers from getting set up. They really did, and as I mentioned before, Rangers could not pass the puck cleanly, and they couldn't generate many shots because of the Kings' defensive pressure style, as well as their resilience to just keep fighting on. Their play in the third periods, again, which also goes back to their play in third periods and overtimes. They dominated. They absolutely dominated. And actually, another area they dominated was the face-off circle. Jarrett Stoll is the best face-off man in that series. Was the best face-off man for either team, and Jarrett Stoll is one of the best, if not the best, face-off man in the entire National Hockey League. Andrei Kopitar, Mike Richards, they're both very good in face-offs. Jeff Carter, when called upon to take a draw, is also very good. And Trevor Lewis is very good at face-offs as well. There's not one guy on that team out of place. There was not one guy on that team out of place. They had a lot of youngsters as well who played very well. You think of guys like Tyler Toffoli and Tanner Pearson, even to a lesser extent, a guy like Lyndon Vay. These are three guys who bear the future for the Los Angeles Kings. These three, Tyler Toffoli in particular, are going to be stars one day. Maybe Tyler Toffoli more than the other two. I think Tanner Pearson, he'll develop into a premier top six forward, as will Lyndon Vay, but Tyler Toffoli is going to be a star. There's just no doubt about it. There's just not one part of their game out of place. Now, those are the reasons why the Los Angeles Kings won. Now we go into why the New York Rangers lost. Why the New York Rangers lost this series? Well, for starters, pretty much quite the opposite of everything as to why the Kings won. But for starters, they could not get scoring from key players. Rick Nash and Brad Richards were both held off the board throughout the series. Same goes for Matt Zuccarello, Derek Brassard, and Carl Hagelin. Even Benoit Pouliot to a lesser extent. Well, he had 2 goals, but that line of Brassard, Pouliot, and Zuccarello, their best and their most consistent line all season and playoff long, could not get it done in the Stanley Cup Finals. For that line, their best game was game number 2. But in game 1 and every game after that, they did not play well. Marty St. Louis was the only top player who really who really did anything at all in that series. Most of the damage for the Rangers in this series came from their fourth line, and that's not very good. Not so much in the way of scoring, but in the way of pressure, offensive zone pressure, generating scoring chances. Dominic Moore, Brian Boyle, even Derek Dorsett. Derek Dorsett, this series was actually the best we had seen him play in quite some time. The best we had seen him play since his days as a member of the Columbus Blue Jackets. He had a great series. Even though he didn't score, he had a tremendous series and really proved that he deserved to be there. I at times felt like Dan Carcillo could have been put in the lineup to generate some more energy. He was available for game number 4 and for game number 5. They opted not to go with him. He is a guy who could have been a big difference as far as cup experience and energy. He could have put the Kings into a bit of a hole, but that was one mistake the Rangers made, in my opinion, that they will regret. But other than that, again, the star players just did not look like the star players. And Brad Richards, who had been so good who was so good in the first 3 rounds, was absolutely god awful in the Stanley Cup Finals. So bad that he found himself in a familiar situation as last year in their second round series against the Boston Bruins, being found playing on the 4th line. He wasn't scratched at any point in the series, but he was on the 4th line for all of Game 4 and most of Game 5. He did not play well. In Game 5, Brad Richards actually did play well in Game 5. That was his best game of the series. But the first 4 games, he was very unnoticeable and turned over the puck a lot. On defense, Ryan McDonagh was really the only contributor on defense. Everyone else was pretty much unnoticeable. Actually, Anton Strawman also played very well in the series. He made some key defensive plays that prevented scoring chances. He made at least one key play a game. So defensively, Anton Strawman was their best defenseman in that series. Offensively, it was Ryan McDonagh. The other 4 defensemen, however, did not really play well. Dan Girardi was the one who turned over the puck, leading to the Justin Williams overtime winner in game number 1. Dan Girardi just, did not really look like himself. He didn't skate well. Kevin Kline, I thought at times tried to be a little too offensive. John Moore, obviously, he wasn't available for game 1. Rafael Diaz played in that, and he didn't do too bad. He generated some chances with his speed, but didn't get a lot of ice time. John Moore, I actually thought he played decent, a little better than the others, but not by much. I thought at times he did some things that almost led to turnovers. But the one defenseman on the Rangers who really did not play well at all was Mark Stahl. Mark Stahl made so many plays in his own zone that would lead to turnovers, including one play where he clearly saw the puck in between his skates and did nothing about it, just skated away, and the Kings almost scored off of it. Mark Stahl was so slow in the series. It's just one of those things that shows you how bad his vision has become on the ice after taking that Kimmo Timonen slap shot a year ago. Mark Stahl just did not look like Mark Stahl, and that's something we're probably going to see for a while. Now, another reason as to why they didn't win was their inability to hold leads. The New York Rangers could not hold a lead in this series to save their life, except for Game 4, obviously. Game 4, but that was just a steal of a game by Henrik Lundqvist. But all 3 games in Los Angeles, all the leads that they had, 2-0 in Game 1, 2-1 in Game 1, 2-0 and 2-1 in Game 2, 3-1 and 3-2 in Game 2, 4-2 and 4-3 in Game 2, and then 2-1 in Game 5. They just could not hold those leads, and the Kings just absolutely killed them. They absolutely killed them. They The Rangers did not play a full 60-minute game. Ultimate reasons why they lost, particularly games 1 and 2. Game 1 and Game 2, really Game 2 in particular, they pretty much had it. They pretty much had it in the bag, and then they would come out in the third period and just would let the Kings swarm them. They tried to shut the Kings down with defense, and it did not work. It absolutely did not work. It was a rough series for the Rangers. They did not, they did not look like themselves. They were not playing a full 60-minute game. Otherwise, we're potentially talking about a completely different series here. We're talking about maybe the Rangers lifting the cup instead of the Los Angeles Kings if they played their game. Playing in the third period and overtime was also extremely tough for the Rangers. Third periods in this series were their absolute worst, and overtimes weren't much better. Again, as I said, they would just let the Kings swarm them, especially in the third period, and they would not establish any pressure at all. They would just sit back and try to block shots, and it did not work. The Kings are a pressure team, and you cannot do that against teams that use their bodies as pressure. The Rangers definitely, with the way they played, did not deserve to win that series. Which takes us to another reason. Costly errors. Which I actually kind of talked about a little bit just a minute ago, but I'll bring up again. They made some errors in the series, again, mostly turnovers that led to goals. Bad plays, really cost them as well. Playing 5-on-5 was a big problem with the Rangers game. I mentioned this with the Kings, but the Rangers struggled, on 5-on-5 way more than they struggled on special teams. They struggled on special teams too. Their power play was horrendous throughout the whole series, and at times their penalty kill did not look like a top-ranked penalty kill like it was during most of the season and playoffs. The Rangers totally looked lackluster at times, but 5-on-5 is where it showed the most. 5-on-5, their play was just absolutely horrendous. They just showed that they just did not deserve to win. And then I think the final reason as to why the Rangers lost the series, the fact that at times Henrik Lundqvist did not look like Henrik Lundqvist. Although he came up with some big saves when called upon, he definitely did not look like himself. He was very tired going through the series, and even though he practically stole Game 4, or in the other 4 games, he let up 3 goals or more. Game 3 was by far his worst opponent. Game 3 was by far his worst performance, and he was the reason why they lost that game. The Rangers dominated that game. If Lundqvist had maybe played a little better in that game, maybe we're talking about another game going into overtime that maybe the Rangers would have won. But that was just a poor performance by Lundqvist, just 12 saves on 15 shots. It was a rough series for him. And I guess part of it could have been that at times he didn't have any support. But again, you don't want to be giving up 3 goals a game. It's just not, it's just not the way it's supposed to work out. And it's just not the way you want to perform. And for Lundqvist, coming up short has been a big thing for him this year. This isn't the first time this year that he came up short. Yes, he came up short of a Stanley Cup this year, but we ought to remember he also came up short in the Olympics with Team Sweden. Team Sweden made it all the way to the gold medal game, and what happens? Henrik Lundqvist gives up 3 goals, and the Team Sweden goes on to lose 3-0, and Canada takes home the gold medal. Now, that wasn't really his fault. It was the fact that Sweden had a lot of injuries, and also Nicholas Backstrom suspended from the gold medal game. It was just not a good situation, And so you can't completely blame Lundqvist for that one, but two heartbreakers in 1 year. First, being unable to win a gold medal, although he does have a gold medal on his resume, and being unable to win a Stanley Cup, he has yet to put a Stanley Cup on his resume. But going to the finals is obviously a good start. And you know what? Despite all these flaws in the finals, and for the Rangers, despite them losing in dismal fashion, this is a team who you have to give a lot of credit to. I'm very proud. I'm sure a lot of people, including myself, are very proud of the New York Rangers and what they have accomplished this year. You talk about the city of New York and New York sports in general having their worst year sports-wise since 1966. Everything was just going downhill for the city of New York, and all of its sports teams, other than the Rangers, all of its sports teams, with the exception of the Brooklyn Nets, were just not making the playoffs. You look at baseball. Both the New York Yankees and New York Mets failed to make the playoffs last year. What else is new for the Mets? But for the Yankees, it was the first time since 2008. It was just a rough season for them. The Mets obviously are not doing good this year. Yankees were struggling at one point, but they've won their last 5 or 6 and have found themselves back in the race for that. I know I'm going a little off topic here, but I'm just trying to make a point. Last year, both the New York Giants and New York Jets failed to make the playoffs. The Jets finished with a 500 record, but it was not enough to make the playoffs. And as for the Giants, a 6-game losing streak to start the season put them in a big hole that they just could not crawl out of. In basketball, the New York Knicks, despite playing very well toward the end of the season, were one of the hotter teams at the end of the year, put themselves in such a big hole at the beginning of the year that it was just too little too late. The timing of them getting hot was just too little too late. The Brooklyn Nets would make the playoffs, but really did not play well in the playoffs. They only barely managed to get past their first-round series against the Toronto Raptors. That was a 7-game series. And then what else is new? They would lose to LeBron James and the Miami Heat in 5 games. And then you look, and then in the NHL, and then of course back to hockey. The New York Islanders missed the playoffs, had a major setback year after making the playoffs last year and losing in the first round in 6 to the Pittsburgh Penguins. They had a major setback year this year, despite a actually really good start. They had a good start to the year, but they really fell apart early, and they just could never recover. And also, even though this team really isn't a New York team, the New Jersey Devils are one of the local teams, so they technically count as well, and they did not make the playoffs. Despite having some good players this year, they were just barely managed to fall out of the race. They did not play well toward the end of the year. They went at the times when they needed to play well and win games, they didn't. Their goaltending was very inconsistent, and they failed to make the playoffs. Then you had the New York Rangers, who got off to such a slow start in the year, only won 3 games on their 9-game road trip that opened the year, and even more dismal, only winning 3 games on a 9-game homestand midway in the year. And when that homestand came around, and they really thought that they could, that homestand came around, a time for the Rangers to win a lot of games and get themselves back in the race. They had a major losing record in those games, and only one of those 3 wins, only one of them came in regulation. And 2 of those wins were the last 2 games of that homestand. But at that point, you pretty much were get ready to give up on the Rangers and getting ready for next season. Their season was pretty much over. However, a big win on the road, a 3-2 win against the Chicago Blackhawks at the United Center was the game that turned their season around. And believe it or not, the Dan Carcillo trade with the Los Angeles Kings was the trade that turned their season around. When Derek Dorsett went down with an injury, Dan Carcillo came along and gave the Rangers the energy boost they needed to play consistent for the rest of the year. Kevin Kline as well. He comes on board and plays absolutely tremendous when Michael Del Zotto was sent to the Nashville Predators. Though he was absolutely great. And then, of course, Rafael Diaz, amazing in the opportunities given. And then, probably most important of all, Ryan Callahan going to the Tampa Bay Lightning for Martin St. Louis. Now, St. Louis, was a little bit disappointing during the regular season, but then really finally found his game at the end of the year, and then obviously found his game at the time where he needed to find it most, the playoffs. If it weren't for him, they wouldn't have gotten past the first round series with the Philadelphia Flyers. That went to 7 games. If not for a major jump of energy from him, among others, they wouldn't have come back from 3-1 down against the Pittsburgh Penguins to win that series. And then he also was one of the better players in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Montreal Canadiens. He had the overtime winner in game number 4. That was a 6-game series. And then in this series, the Stanley Cup Finals against the Los Angeles Kings, they lost in 5 games, obviously, but he was the only star player who even played remotely well in that series. He had 2 goals in the series. He was very, very good in the series. You give Marty St. Louis a lot of credit. He played great. He proved to be a much better acquisition than what it looked like early on. And he still has another year left on his contract. So he's got 1 more year to go with the New York Rangers. He wasn't like he was a rental player. They have him for next year. And the Rangers have a lot to look forward to going into next year. They've now been, since the lockout, they've now been in every round, and they've lost in every round. So now it's only a matter of time before they finally get to win their 5th franchise Stanley Cup. They're very, very close. And because of this year, the window of opportunity still opened. And what the Rangers did this year, they gave the people of New York and New York City, of the state of New York and New York City, a lot of hope. Even the Buffalo teams, I didn't really mention them because they may not count, but they're still part of New York State. The Buffalo Sabres were obviously the worst team in the NHL, and the Buffalo Bills in football have not been a good team in a very long time. So, you think of New York and everything it's been through with its sports, a dismal playoff by the Brooklyn Nets, obviously, even though they went to the second round. You got to think that they could have played a lot better in the playoffs. And then you got the New York Rangers, the only New York team that not only made the playoffs but played consistent. Maybe not in this series, maybe not in the Stanley Cup Finals, but in the 3 previous series, they were consistent. They used their speed. Their defense was fantastic. And they've given the people of New York hope, that despite everything that the city has been through with its other teams, that there is hope for the city to win another championship. The last championship in New York was not too long ago, actually. 2012, in the Super Bowl, the New York Giants defeated the New England Patriots, but again, they've missed the playoffs the past 2 years, and they're pretty much prone to miss the playoffs again this year. The Rangers, however, they're the one New York team that you're pretty much going to expect to make the playoffs, and they're the team that's going to give the city hope. And it's only going to be a matter of time until they lift Lord Stanley's Cup. However, that day will not be today. Today, the cup belongs to the team that rightfully deserved it, the the Los Angeles Kings. Congratulations again to the Los Angeles Kings as they defeated the New York Rangers in 5 games. And with that now being all said and done, before we end this off, take a quick look at the New York Rangers and what's up for them this off season. They're free agents, and they're restricted and unrestricted free agents. Starting with their unrestricted free agents, as far as unrestricted free agents are concerned, they actually got quite a bit to worry about this year. Here, Derek Brassard, but the one player they'll have to worry about most of all is Derek Brassard. He's hard. Derek Brassard is the Rangers' top unrestricted free agent this year, and he is a guy that they are definitely going to look to re-sign, or at least at least I hope the Rangers are thinking that. This guy needs to stay with the team. He was so good. Glenn Sather needs to keep this guy on board. He is playing as a third-line center, while holding all that potential in the world to be a top 6 player. He's still a relatively young player, and he has been great ever since he came over from the Columbus Blue Jackets. Day one, he has been a very consistent performer for them. And this is a guy who the Rangers need to keep. He is one of their better he is the best depth player on their team. Next to Carl Hagelin, he's probably the best depth player on their team, and this is a guy who they need to aim to keep. I really hope the Rangers do. I really do. They got Brian Boyle. He is an unrestricted free agent as well. The things that I've heard about Brian Boyle, a lot of Ranger fans really, have wanted him out for a very long time. He hasn't been the same offensive player that he was in 2010, 2011 when he had 21 goals and 35 points. However, when it comes playoff time, he becomes a completely different player. He's one of their top, if not their top, penalty-killing forwards. And in this year's playoffs, he really showed how well he can play defensively. But the weak side for him is that because he's so big, he's really slow. And he's just going to be one of those players, in my mind, he's going to be one of those players who, despite knowing that he probably doesn't deserve it, it's going to be asking for a lot of money next year and for a decent amount of years. I'm not sure if the Rangers are going to be willing to pay him that much. And honestly, if he's going to be asking for that much, there's no way the Rangers should be giving him a contract. And honestly, I think it's time for Brian Boyle to go anyway. As good as he was in the playoffs this year, the Rangers have other players, future players that are going to be much better than him, and these future players are a big part of their future, and they're going to be good for them for a good while. So, Brian Boyle, to me, is gone. I've heard many talks that the Vancouver Canucks are quite interested in his talents. I think he'd be a great addition for them, but I think his time in New York has run out. That's just my opinion. He may resign, but in my opinion, his time in New York has run out. Next, Benoit Pouliot. This is probably the Rangers' most interesting unrestricted free agent this year, because he played so good for them this year. In fact, a career year for the former 2005 4th overall pick, who definitely has not lived up to his draft status. We know that for a fact, but he's so talented. But he's got a good amount of talent, solid hands, solid skating ability, and a good shot to boot. And as a depth player, he was so good for the Rangers this year. And again, point-wise, it was a career year for him, and he was great in the playoffs. Obviously there was a point in the year where he was constantly scratched, but at one point he had enough of being scratched, and it fueled him, it motivated him, and he became a consistent lineup player, and just a consistent player overall for them. But as far as if the Rangers are going to keep him or not, it's really tough to say with this one. I think it would for Benoit Pouliot, to me, it can really go either way for the Rangers. I think I would have no problems with the Rangers if they kept him. However, I would also have no problems if they let him go. I think either way, it's not a bad move. Pouliot was great for them, and it would be great for him to come back another year or two and prove himself again. But at the same time, once again, we go back to the fact that the Rangers do have some kids coming up that are going to have bright future for the franchise. I think Carl Hagelin is a guy who could definitely play on that line with Derek Brassard and Matt Zuccarello, if, of course, Brassard re-signs. And that would give the line a lot more speed. But, and Pouliot's really one of those players that you can pretty much find anywhere. A depth player who scores a decent amount, you can find that player pretty much anywhere. And he was good in the playoffs. He was actually one of the better players in the Stanley Cup Finals as well. He had a couple of goals, including the first goal of the Finals for either team. So, it's really tough to say. I think if I were the Rangers, if I were the general manager of the Rangers, I personally would probably let him go, but there's no problem with bringing him back either. I think if the Rangers could get a shot at maybe going for someone better to play on that line, specifically a left winger, then by all means go for it. But if you don't want to take that risk, then bring him back, I personally would take the risk, but that's just me. So I think this one could really go either way. Dominic Moore is also an unrestricted free agent. This is a guy who I think the Rangers definitely need to re-sign. He was so good for them this year. Maybe not in the very beginning of the year. In the very beginning of the year, he was inconsistent. But once he finally found his game and got his game together, he not only became one of their more valuable players toward the end of the regular season, but he was maybe their most valuable player in the playoffs at times, particularly on the penalty kill. I believe he led them in face-offs. I believe he led them in face-offs in the playoffs. And he was their key penalty killer. He's their key penalty killing forward. This is a guy who is a depth player and nothing more. He's a fourth liner at this point in his career, and he knows it. But he is a valuable fourth line player, who plays a shutdown style. He's a defensive forward, and he's very good at what he does. He's got solid speed, and he gave the Rangers a lot of energy, especially in the playoffs. And he was actually also, despite the rough series, was one of the better performers for the Rangers in the Stanley Cup Finals. So I think Dominic Moore is a guy who they definitely need to bring back and sign for more than just 1 year, at least 2 years, maybe 3. But, that's kind of a stretch, but maybe 3. But it's going to be interesting to see what they do with Dominic Moore. I think personally, a lot of it too is going to just be dependent on what happens to Brian Boyle as well. I think they'll go one and not the other. But if I had to choose which one, I'd honestly choose Dominic Moore. That's just my opinion. Even though he's a couple years older, I'd still go with Dominic Moore. And then the last unrestricted free agent forward you got is Dan Carcillo. I think Carcillo at times did not get the credit that he definitely deserved in New York. He gave them so much energy, and he literally was the player that pretty much turned their season around. And the opportunities he got in the playoffs, he used those opportunities very well. I think he deserved to get a game in the Stanley Cup Finals. I think he would have given them a lot of energy and given them some consistency as well. He is a human wrecking crew out there. I personally, if I were the GM of the Rangers, I definitely would re-sign him. I don't think Sather will, though. I have a gut feeling that he's going to let him go. But if given the chance, especially if Brian Boyle does in fact leave, You need another physical player that can play along with Derek Dorsett and prevent your team from getting beat up out there. And that was actually another reason why the Kings won and the Rangers lost. The Rangers physically got beat out there. Got just physically beat up out there. The Kings are a big team, each line at least 600 pounds, and they got beaten up out there. They got out-hit on every play. They got beat to every puck because of physicality. It was just not fair for the Rangers, and I think maybe Carcillo being in the lineup could have potentially changed that. So I think the Rangers should re-sign him, or maybe if not necessarily him, at least another fourth liner who plays a similar style. But if you can't find that guy, then he's your best option. Plus, he's got a lot of experience in the playoffs and finals. He's a Cup champion from 2013 last year with the Chicago Blackhawks, and a finalist with the Philadelphia Flyers in 2010 as well. So, if given the opportunity, if I were the Rangers, if I were Glenn Sather, bring him back at all costs. That's just me, though. On defense, the Rangers only really have two unrestricted free agent defensemen, and they are Anton Stralman and Rafael Diaz. Anton Stralman, to me, I don't think, even though he played very well in the Stanley Cup Finals and is a proven shutdown defenseman, I don't see the Rangers bringing him back. And ultimately for the fact that he really did not have a good regular season this year. Even though he was great in the playoffs, in the regular season it was definitely his worst year as a Ranger by far. He did not play well at all, especially after the Olympics. He was not good at all. He was not good at all. And honestly, there are a couple of good free agent defensemen out there. With that being said, I think the Rangers could go for someone. I think the Rangers could definitely use an upgrade on defense. Whether it's from a kid within the system or going out and getting a guy like Matt Niskanen. He's a guy who may be asking for a lot of money, but he is definitely a major upgrade from Anton Stralman, not only as an offensive defenseman, but as a defensive defenseman as well. He's a two-way player. If the Rangers have the opportunity to go out and get a player like that, then they should definitely take it and let Stralman walk. Rafael Diaz, again, he was mainly just brought in to be, the seventh defenseman. They needed a better seventh defenseman than what they had in Justin Falk. And Diaz, when called upon to play, played amazing. His speed really handed the Rangers a lot of wins. However, at the same time, he's one of those guys who you could pretty much find anywhere. I don't see the Rangers bringing him back. I don't see Stralman or Diaz coming back. I really do not. Then you got guys down in the minors who also will not be back. Guys like Aaron Asham, Darryl Powell, and David Lemieux. Those are guys who probably will not be back. Stu Bickle, a guy who we have not seen since the lockout-shortened year for a little bit in the regular season. He did not play at all this year. He was part of the Rangers 2012 team, but, he is obviously not the player who everyone thought was going to be, and he's a guy who probably will be gone as well. And then guys like Aaron Johnson, Michael Haley, Danny Sivret, those are all minor league players. They'll maybe one of those guys will stay, but highly unlikely. Very highly unlikely. And then you got, the restricted free agents for the Rangers. On front, Chris Kreider and Matt Zuccarello. Both of these guys are huge parts of the Rangers' future. And especially Chris Kreider. He's the guy who many expect to eventually be their star player. He is definitely going to be signed. The Rangers will definitely be trying to sign him to a decent contract. Matt Zuccarello, he was their leading scorer during the regular season last year, and at times their most consistent player in the playoffs. The first Norwegian to ever play and score in the Stanley Cup Finals. The Rangers will, without a doubt, be looking to give him a big contract as well. On defense, they also have two restricted free agents, Justin Falk and John Moore. Justin Falk, I think, is a guy who they're going to send to arbitration and let walk as an unrestricted free agent. I think that should be the case. He did not play well at all when he played. Very big player and very, very slow. And then John Moore, he's an interesting one. I think at times he was very good, but at times he made mistakes as well. Ultimately, I do think the Rangers will give him a contract, at least for a couple of years, maybe a year. I'd say maybe a year just to see, to give him another shot to prove himself and become a better player, because John Moore is one of those guys who definitely has the potential to become a better player. He's a former first-round pick by the Columbus Blue Jackets, acquired in that Marian Gaborik trade, along with Derek Brassard and Derek Dorsett, and he has the potential to become a really good player. He's a really good youngster, and he has a lot of potential. I actually do kind of hope they re-sign John Moore instead of sending him to arbitration. I think they will, but we'll see. Only time will tell. And then in the minors, they got guys like Jason Mission, Danny Cristo, Kyle Jean, Kyle Jean, Ryan Bork, Scott Stager, Jason Wilson, and Kyle Beach. Most of these guys are probably going to get re-signed, especially Danny Cristo. Danny Cristo is a guy who they have many, 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 many high hopes for. He is a youngster. He was the captain of the Hartford Wolfpack last year, and he is a guy who could very easily crack the roster as soon as next season. He is a guy who could quite potentially be ready. I think he'll be, at the very least, be given a shot next year. We'll see what happens, though. It's going to be a really interesting year for Danny Cristo, I think. I think he will ultimately be re-signed, but, and I think he's going to be given all the looks in training camp and during, the beginning of the regular season and the preseason as well, of course. So we'll see. It's going to be very interesting. However, despite all these free agents and unrestricted free agents, Rangers do have a couple of big questions to ask themselves. They have a lot of valuable players going to restricted and unrestricted free agency next year as well, particularly two restricted free agents in Derek Stepan and Carl Hagelin. You can bet that as the season progresses, the Rangers are going to start talking about contract extensions with these two players, and the Rangers will definitely want to re-sign them. They'll be very valuable assets to their team for many years to come. Derek Dorsett, he's an unrestricted free agent next year. He's a guy, a fourth liner, who they definitely will probably try to re-sign. Marty St. Louis, an unrestricted free agent next year. However, he will most likely, I have a feeling he will most likely retire after the season's over, or maybe come back for one more year. Who knows? Their backup goaltender, Cam Talbot, is an unrestricted free agent next year. The Rangers will try to sign him for a few years to be the backup to King Henrik Lundqvist. Cam Talbot is the prince. But their big unrestricted free agent for next year is, without a doubt, defenseman Mark Stahl. This is a guy who they're definitely going to want to start talking a contract extension with as early as this offseason. They're definitely going to want to talk to him as early as this offseason, because this is a key player for their defense group. And this is a guy who they definitely do not want to see getting on a plane to join his brothers in Carolina with the Hurricanes. This is one Stahl brother who they do not want to see in Carolina. They're going to do everything possible to try to re-sign him and re-sign him for a long-term deal. And resign him to a long-term deal. Hopefully the Rangers can get that done. I think Stahl is, when he plays well, is a very valuable asset to their team. Obviously the vision thing is a key factor. And honestly, I think part of, while the discussions are going on, they're definitely going to be looking into his overall play for next year. He's a shutdown defenseman. They're going to be looking into his overall play next year. If he does not play well, then they'll probably let him go. Otherwise, they're probably going to try to keep him around. We'll see, though. But probably the big question of all for the offseason, what is the fate of veteran center Brad Richards? Brad Richards still has 6 years left on a 9-year deal that he signed during the 2011 offseason, and quite frankly, from an overall standpoint, Brad Richards has not by any means lived up to that contract. He is not the same player that he used to be. He's 33 years of age, and his highlight moment, quite frankly, was actually the 2012 playoffs. That was his best time as a Ranger. He was the Rangers' leading scorer in the playoffs that year. That was probably his best overall season as a Ranger. He had 66 points that year, which isn't bad. 25 goals also, not bad. He scored some key game winners for them that year. But he's definitely not the same Brad Richards. He had a terrible year in the lockout year, particularly in the playoffs. And this year was kind of a rejuvenated year for him in a sense. 20 goals, 51 points, not great, but not terrible. More of the numbers that you'd see from a second line center, which realistically he really shouldn't be. He should be more of a top line guy, at least for another couple of years. And he was solid in the playoffs up until the Stanley Cup Finals, of course, where he found himself on the fourth line again, and he just didn't produce. He was one of the worst players on the team for them in that series. He did not look like the Brad Richards from 2004 like they thought that he would be. The Rangers do have one compliance buyout left, and you can bet your butt on it. I've heard rumors that regardless of how Richards was going to play this year, that they were going to buy him out anyway, but we'll see. It's going to be really interesting. Going to be really interesting to see what they do with Brad Richards. Obviously, they'll have some cap go against them if they do buy out Brad Richards and send him to unrestricted free agency. But at the same time, they will be cleared of most of his contract, and they'll have some cap space to work with to re-sign their other core players and for this year and next year as well. They do not have anybody who is slated to be a free agent in the 2016 offseason as of right now. But we'll see, though. Rangers want to get these guys signed up. They have a good core, and they're going to do whatever it takes to keep it together, even if it means buying out Brad Richards and going after someone who's going to be a little bit cheaper, like a Paul Stastny or a Mike Camilleri. It will be a centerman for sure. They're going to try to get a center to take his place, but we'll see. It's going to be an interesting off-season for the New York Rangers and their relationship with Brad Richards. And another real big question is who's going to become the captain for the New York Rangers next year. It definitely was said that they would have a new captain during the offseason this year. Who will it be? We'll have to wait and see. But for now, just going to have to rest easy. July 1st, the July 1st free agent frenzy is just around the corner. It's June 14th now. It's just around the corner, and it's going to be an interesting offseason for sure. A lot of big names out there this year. Probably the deepest free agency class we've had in a very long time. We have the 2014 NHL entry draft coming up. Not going to be a big draft year as far as the players being drafted, but will definitely be the biggest draft year in a long time as far as trades go, or that is to be expected. Guys like Ryan Kessler and Jason Spezza in particular could very well be traded at the draft. Christian Ehrhoff as well. It's going to be a very interesting offseason for sure for many guys. Vincent LeCavalier as well. We'll see, though. Going to be very unique. Going to be a very interesting offseason. We also have the awards coming up. But for now, once again, I will say this for the final time to close out the 2013-2014 season. Congratulations once again to the Los Angeles Kings on their second Stanley Cup and second cup in 3 years as they defeat the New York Rangers in 5 games. Well, that's pretty much it, guys. That's it for the season. I will have another video coming up tomorrow. I do have plans tomorrow because the Los Angeles Kings won the Stanley Cup. For tomorrow's video, I will be doing a Los Angeles Kings season in review to review their regular season as well as their magical playoff run. So be sure to check that out. It's going to be one of my more interesting videos for sure. And with that being said, that's it. That's it for the playoffs. That's it for the season. I'll have my video tomorrow, but then after that, I will not have another one until the NHL awards. So be sure to stay tuned for that. It's going to be another interesting video. So that'll do it, guys. That's it for episode 128 of Hockey on the Spot, pretty much. But before I go, just real quick, a couple of quick updates. Just a couple of real quick updates. Couple of mostly revolving around the Montreal Canadiens. They have signed head coach Michel Therrien to a contract extension, I believe, for 4 years. Great move by the organization. Yes, a 4-year contract extension. He got them all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, and with him on board, it would only be a matter of time for Montreal to get back to the Stanley Cup Finals for the first time since 1993. And they've also made a trade acquiring a conditional 2015 fifth-round pick in exchange for prospect forward and former 2009 first-rounder Louis LeBlanc, as he was sent to the Anaheim Ducks. Louis LeBlanc is a guy who has just not broken out into the NHL just yet. He's still young, though. Still got a lot to prove. Maybe, he has a good year in the minors. He'll be a guy to watch in training camp. The Ducks could get themselves a good player here if he turns out to be, if he turns out to be better than initially expected. If he lives up to his draft status, he could go on to be a good player for the Ducks and a good centerman for them. So we'll see. That's something that'll be very interesting. He'll be one of their more watched players in training camp this year for sure. So we'll see. It's going to be an interesting offseason, but hopefully he can become the player that everyone thought he was going to be, but we will see. And then the Detroit Red Wings have signed a free agent forward, Thomas Nozick, to a 2-year entry-level deal. He's 21 years of age. He completed his 3rd season for HC Pardubice in the Czech Extraliga, pacing the team with 44 points in 52 games. He led the team in goals and assists and contributed 6 points in 10 postseason appearances. He's 6'2", 201 pounds. He tallied 14 points in 50 games with the team in 2012-2013, adding 5 points in 5 contests with HC Radek Kralov in the second-tier Czech Republic, and 14 points in just 6 games with HC Pardubice's under-20 team. Very interesting indeed. So this kid could go on to become a pretty good player. So we'll see. It's going to be another interesting prospect for the Detroit Red Wings, as they are not getting any younger. So we'll see. Going to be a very interesting offseason. We'll see though. Going to be really exciting to watch to see what happens this offseason. Alrighty, guys. That will officially do it for episode 128 of Hockey on the Spot. This has been Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld. I will see you guys again tomorrow with my Los Angeles Kings season in review. Thank you guys and have a great night.